Yeah. Where's my sound man? Where am I looking? Okay, you good? Okay, welcome. Thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you today. I was told there's 160 of you here, and they got here and counted 140 seats and realised that it wasn't going to go too well. So to the guys that are sitting up there on the lounge, don't fall asleep. There'll be good reason for you to fall asleep, but hang in there. Shouldn't be too long. Hey, listen, here's a good reason not to fall asleep. I had a look at this flyer. It made me tired just reading it. You know, I mean, what have they got there? The monster trucks, the demolition derby. That's just getting into the car park. And the drifting is not drifting off to sleep, it's drifting your car. So, yeah, it looks like a great event, so I won't need that. Can I just simply start by saying thank you. Thanks for turning up, and what a privilege it is for me to actually come and talk to this many guys. I assume you're all pretty local. I know there are some cops in the room, there's some ex-cops in the room. A real good mate of mine down here, John Carroll. I didn't know you were coming, Johnny Carroll. But, you know, I think back and I look at someone like John Carroll who worked for years, his commitment to the New South Wales Police Force, but more importantly to you, as the community of New South Wales, was something that was second to none. Guys like him are the reason why I stand here today and can talk to you about how successful the police force was. And he lived a courageous leadership life, both in the cops and out of it. So, John, it's great to have you here, mate. You're looking well. If there's anything to be said, I tell you what, yeah, we need to recognise guys like him. It's great to see you look 10 years younger than when I saw you last, which is fantastic. So that means Tony Lauer, who I know sort of comes from parts not too far from here, he's up around Penrith way, but he used to say, for every year you give as the commissioner, you look 10 years older, but for every year you're out, you get 10 years back. So far, I've got 5 years back, and I'm hoping to get a whole lot more. When I got an invite to come and talk to you, I thought, well, it's a privilege to come and talk to guys, but what do you want to hear? So I'm thinking we're going to talk for about half an hour, and we're going to give it over to you. Now, I can make that shorter than half an hour, so we've got more time for you to ask questions. I don't know how long we've got for questions, but we do have a microphone. With a group this big, you'll need a mic, and I'm happy to take them and we'll see where we go. If there are any that are really, really hard, I'll give those to John Carroll. That's all right. Jack's good at answering those sort of questions. And from my perspective, you can ask anything you like. Is that are we all good? Do it that way? All right. Let me tell you a little bit about me. The intro was a good one because it was very short. Normally when you hear those sort of, they read out your academic qualifications and where you've served, it just makes you feel old. It doesn't do anything for you. So from my perspective, I'll get a chance to tell you a little bit, not so much about me, but about the organisation that I was part of for a long time. Now, you might think I joined in 1980, 37 years. You think that's a long time. Some people have served much longer than 37 years in the New South Wales Police Force. I came here. One of the guys up the back says, how much Italian do you speak? I said, none. He said, not even ravioli? I said, I said, well, how do you order ravioli when you go to the restaurant? I said, number 7. I'll have number 7. No, I don't speak Italian. My father was born in France. His father was Italian and his mother was French. On the other side, my mum was born in Northern Ireland, a little place called County Armagh, Lurgan, County Armagh, Northern Ireland. I was born in London. I was born in England and came here as a kid. In fact, as a baby, I came here in 1959. We were 10-pound poms. There'd be a few in this room. With a room this size, looking at how young you all are, there'd be a few in this room. 10-pound poms came to this country, and in our case, we had nothing. We knew no one. We didn't have any family, didn't have any friends. It was just a chance to go, I assume, somewhere else, start a new life and start a better life. How blessed am I that my parents did that, had the ticket to do it. That's a big move. The other side of the world, no, nobody, let's just go and do it and start a new life. I grew up in southwestern Sydney. I grew up in Padstow. Haven't moved too far in all my life. I live at Lugano now, which is, probably 3 kilometres away from where I grew up. I went to school in the area. We lived in Ronald Street, Padstow. Tearaway kid, people sort of think, yeah, well, you're obviously a church man. So what, church important? I didn't go into a church until I was probably 12. We didn't come from a church family. And the only reason I ended up going into a church was because there was a young couple moved into the house next door to us who were recently married, and they were in charge of the kids group, the youth group at the local Baptist church. And it was as a result of that they used to ask me to come along, and every now and again I'd go along to church, and particularly the kids club. And I started sort of hanging with some of these younger kids, realising that they were a little bit different to me. They seemed to have all the same problems, but they had a lot more answers than I did as a young 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. At 14, I discovered two things. I actually made a commitment to become a Christian, so I discovered Jesus, and he became all to me in terms of my future life, and I discovered there were girls in the youth group that were very pretty. That was a really good reason to stay there. I met a girl called Joy there at 14. Didn't really connect with her until I was about 17. At 19, we got engaged. At 20, married, and we've been married 39 years, 40 years next year. So youth group was very, very kind to me. We're 39 years. When we're realising we don't want to rush these things, but I think it's probably going to last. I know that from my perspective, that when you become a Christian, there are many that would say things are meant to get really good. Well, whilst things did get better, and I was blessed to have met her, at the same time my father died 3 months after I became a Christian. So a 14-year-old boy in southwestern Sydney, Tearaway, had not a lot of connection other than for this new connection into a church of 3 months. You sort of stand on the precipice. There were lots of my mates that went to Sir Joseph Banks High School, which was certainly not Sir Joey's, as everyone thought it was. It was a pretty rough old school in Milperra. They made a lot of bad decisions, and their lives actually showed that for many years to come. A number of them actually, with drug addictions, became really problems to community. Some of them died, overdosed. And here I was, a young fellow that was in that similar position. The beauty of the decision that I'd made to become a Christian was it set me on a foundation, it set me on a pathway. That pathway took me into a building trade where I worked as an apprentice electrician for a number of years. Ultimately, at 21, I joined the police. Now, for anyone that's in the cops now, and John, you'd recall, if you joined the cops at 21, back in the 70s and 80s, you were probably the old bloke in the group. I was the old bloke in my group. What a difference. Today, those kids that are down there, I call them kids, those people that are down there at Goulburn throwing their hat in the air, their average age is 27. We're a much older police force. For a good reason, but we are a much older police force, much more life experience. Look, I took on the role as a general duties officer. I actually was posted at Hurstville. I worked in general duties. I did work on a bike. It was an interesting story. Before I joined the police, I worked in customs, and I'd worked at an area that had responsibility, was the old Australian Narcotics Bureau. We worked on a job involving a former senior New South Wales police officer by the name of Murray Riley, and he was involved in a very big drug importation. It was a ship called the Anoa, and it was on a place called Polkington Reef. Anyway, I was part of it, right on the periphery. My job at night was to guard was Cannabis Head that was taken off the boat at a marine centre in Neutral Bay, and I met some New South Wales police officers there. And at that stage, I was not sure what I was going to do, and they said, "Why don't you come and join the police force?" So I went down and applied and joined, and the rest was history. I saw one of those officers when I first joined, and he said, "Look, why don't you try and come into what was then the BCI, come across as a surveillance operative, but you need to go and do a motorbike course." So I went and did the police motorcycle course, the certification course, which I thought, they pay people to do this, like how good is this? And I finished my course, and most of the people that went on that program, that course failed, and I was one of, I think, 3 out of the program that got through, and never thought any more of it, and thought, oh, well, I'll use that at some stage later on. I went on leave. I came back from leave, and I walked in, and there was a sergeant down at Kingsgrove Police Station where I got stationed. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "This is where I work, Sarge." "Not anymore, you don't. You've been transferred." I got transferred. I got shanghaied down onto a motorbike. I turned up. They said, "Go down to the Grosvenor Street Annex underneath the Harbour Bridge." and that's where the inner city cycle patrol was stationed. So I walked in there thinking, what on earth am I doing? Caught the train in, had no idea what I was doing. I rode out on a motorbike that afternoon and went home, and Joy said, what are you doing? I had jodhpurs on and a helmet. I had no idea what I was doing. I turned up and said, this is what I do now. And I didn't last all that long. Is there any traffic cops here? Any ex-traffic cops? I didn't last long because I used to caution too many people. And there was a sergeant there by the name of Jones, Roy Jones or Ron Jones. Anyway, and he called me and he said, you got to go. So I said, because you caution everyone, you don't give pills. So I said, well, you know, I'm a bit sorry for him. And but I was all right. I had one summer on the bike. I loved it. It was fantastic. So the bike was good. I had a black Kawasaki, for those that could remember, the old Black 1000 Mark II Kawasaki. So, yeah, good. So I progressed through the ranks. There's nothing extraordinary about that. I went through every rank that was there. I went into... in 1985, I actually before then, I went into the gaming squad. I got pulled into to work in a group that came after Beck's Raiders, old Merv Beck and his team, and I ended up going out to Bankstown where I did my designation as a detective and got dragged into a brand new place at the time, which was the National Crime Authority. Started down there in 1985, and I was on triad investigations in the early days, so it was organised crime, those that are importing massive heroin importations into Australia, on a task force of 20. I was only meant to go there for 3 months, and I ended up staying 7 years, but then ultimately came back to New South Wales Police, worked in an electronic surveillance area in a covert group, and then was getting ready for the Olympics in 2000. There was a brand new commissioner brought into Australia. I'd previously had a lot of training offshore with the National Crime Authority and with New South Wales Police, and I was, in 95, I actually went over to the UK and had a fair bit of time with the British Police and the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, over in Belfast. And we got a new commissioner in 1997. Peter Ryan arrived. For those of you who can remember, Peter was here from 97 to about 2001 and two. And I got a phone call from him one day, and I'd never met him before, and he said, oh, you need to come up to my office. And he called, he said, look, I want you to work as my Chief of Staff. I didn't know what a Chief of Staff did. I didn't know we had Chiefs of Staff in the police force. I was just a cop. And I went in for him for 3 months and ended up staying until 2000 just after 2000, end of 2000. So I was exposed to that top level within the organisation, and from there I was promoted through and took on the role as a Deputy Commissioner, and then moved into the executive. And as has been indicated, 2007 I took up the role as Commissioner, and I finished in 2017. So, potted version, that's it. I only took 3 breaths just then. All of that to say, you know what? Whilst I had the privilege of serving as a police officer, I can assure you everything that happened in my career was never about me. Never about me. I'm just mindful of the time, so I'm going to stick to that because you've got to get out of here. My time as the New South Wales Police Commissioner was all about you, and it was all about the organisation. One of the young guys that I just had a cup of tea with up the back earlier said, so what were some of the bigger crises or some of the bigger problems you had? You know, what are the challenges? I think what were the challenges? I said, you couldn't believe the amount of challenges that we faced every day. But that's okay. That was part of the job. And my job was to be there in a leadership role and to lead a big organisation. When I put some of these numbers to you, you will not fully understand just how big this organisation was. At the moment, it sits at about 21,000 people. It's a big organisation. They look after, because I'm no longer there. I've been out 5 months now, so there's nothing as X as an X. So I'm no longer claiming to be a cop. But having said that, the New South Wales Police Force looks after About 7.5 million. I always thought that there were more because that doesn't take into consideration visitors and those that we don't know that are here. Let's say 7.5 million people. The size of the patch is 800,000 square kilometres. We spent your money last year, $3.2 billion. Big organisation? You reckon you're going to get challenges in a joint that's 21,000, spending $3.5 billion, looking after 8 million on 800,000 square kilometres? Yeah, there's a challenge or two there. But that was okay. For me, I was blessed in so many ways. I had good people. And this sort of bloke here is the example. This John Carroll, for those that can't see, he's just one of thousands, but he was one of the people, and he was an example of those men and women that give their all, that make it easy for a commissioner to actually get on and do the job. Because you know what? It wasn't about me. It was never about me. I didn't own them. I didn't own the police force. You did. Today you own the police force. They were never mine. They were never a commissioner's. They belonged to the community. My job was to serve them as much as it was to serve you. And so in that regard, I was blessed that I was able to be their leader. Now, I'm sure many of the decisions I made necessarily weren't decisions that they would all agree with. The fact is, sometimes in leadership, you've got to make decisions that aren't popular, and that's part of the being courageous, and that's really important in leadership. Having said that, I saw the organisation go from one that was doing pretty well to one that was excelling in terms of keeping you safe, and that's what it was all about. What do we have a police force for if it's not to keep you safe, if it's not to stop you from becoming a victim of a crime? And if you look at the crime figures for today, I can assure you, in terms of performance in this state and compared to every other state in Australia, you're doing very, very well. If you look at some of the problems that they're encountering in places like Victoria at the moment, Melbourne, terrible, Queensland, and yet at the same time, those crimes that really, really irk you, you might think, oh, it's no big deal. When someone steals your car, I can recall when I took on this role as Commissioner, I actually wrote down, I had a book, I used to call it the Green Book, things I wanted to do, the targets. One of them was to bring crime back down to, and particularly in stolen motor vehicles, back down to 1980s levels. And Don Weatherburn, the head of the Bureau of Crime Statistics, said to me, you never get there, because there's so many more cars now, and you know, so many more drivers. We got there, you're there. There were more cars stolen in 1989 than there was in New South Wales last year. Now, you can't claim that as being all you. There's better engineering in cars, we know it's harder to steal them, but it's the same in break and enters in a whole range of areas. But the one thing, the only show that was in town was doing everything we could possibly do to keep you safe, because that's the only reason we're here. We're only here for you. So it was never about me. I was doubly blessed in that I had a faith that allowed me to go to work every day and sort of say, well, you know what, I'm going to do my best. But it's not something that I need to be over concerned about, because at the end of the day, I'm doing this for you, Father. And that was the way I'd go to work. People say, oh yeah, but did you proselytise? I didn't have to proselytise. You know, who was it? I think it was Mother Teresa, but I think she may have stole it. She didn't probably steal much, but she probably stole this from St. Francis of Assisi. She said, in everything you do, preach the gospel. And if you must, talk about it. Not bad advice, is it? Not bad advice. So I had to live it. So, you know, that meant I had to control my life. Because, you know, if I was going to be a leader, I wanted to be a courageous leader. And if I wanted the organisation to be courageous in their decision-making, you need to model it. See, courage isn't something that you can buy down the shop. Courage is something that's caught, whether it's in a work environment or whether it's in your family. You want your boys or your daughters, you want your kids to be courageous? Be courageous. Live courageous life. Live genuine, authentic, courageous lives. and you're on a really good starting point to get those things coming through in your kids. Because they see it, they watch it lived, and then they do it. How do you think our soldiers get courageous? By seeing those that have gone before them, by recalling what they've done, and then going and living it. And so, as a police commissioner, that's a big part of your job. And I needed to have the strength, the courage, the understanding that I wasn't doing this alone and it wasn't about me, to be able to make sure that I modelled what it was to be a Christian man. And you know, it's pretty easy to do that when things are going well. When things are going bad, sometimes it's not quite so easy. And it can be something as simple as your tongue. You know, whether you've got 3 birds on the side, or whether you've got a raging gambling habit. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone here does, but you know what I'm talking about. They're the things that people sit back and watch. The only reason I went to that church when I was 12, because I sat back for a couple of years and watched these 2 people that lived next door to me to see whether they were the real deal, whether they were authentic. And I watched them, and I watched them, and I watched them, and they were. And I thought, you know what, that's okay for me. As a kid, I was looking for authentic leadership. As I got older, I was looking for it. You know, I mean, I can tell you, as a 14-year-old boy, when your dad goes and you've got no other uncles or grandparents, or there's no one really in your life to be the strong male role model, where do you turn? Who do you turn to? I was blessed. Without even knowing, there were 3 blokes in that church. 3 blokes that basically taught me how to be a man, how to be a husband, and then how to be a father. How fortunate was I? And I didn't even know it. They were doing exactly what I said Mother Teresa said. In everything they were doing, they were teaching me how to be the man, the father, the husband. They didn't have to say much. They just did it. They lived it, and it was authentic. And it rubbed off on me. It gave me the courage in those tough times. And so I guess where I'll leave you, because I am mindful that we're getting pretty close to time. I've got a couple of minutes left before we go to questions. I know that as I finished only 5 months ago, I reflect, and I've reflected over many days, just how fortunate I was. I came from a kid that came from nowhere. How good is this country? How good is this country? No way. I know a lot of commissioners from around the world. I've had, an organisation of this size, of this much influence globally, and you don't realise just how influential the New South Wales Police Force is globally, because it's a very big force. It's one of the biggest forces in the world. You mix with commissioners and chiefs, and you understand. I would get together with the top 20 chiefs every year for 10 years from around the world. On 2 occasions brought them here to Australia, here to Sydney. And you realise just how important policing is in every country. You know, you look at events overnight in London, here they go. I think they've had 5 terrorist attacks this year so far, and it's not over yet. You realise that policing is so important. There is no way in those countries that I'm talking about that you could go from one part of the world. You couldn't be born in Australia and then go over and become the chief of the New York Police Department. It just doesn't happen, because they basically look after those that are from there. Here am I, a kid that was born in London, that came here as a 10-pound pom, grew up in Western Sydney, and I was fortunate enough to be the 21st Police Commissioner in the history of New South Wales Police Force, the oldest, the largest force in the nation. Privileged to look after you for that 10 years that I stewarded the organisation, and even more privileged to have worked with some fantastic people. It's not something that I take lightly. I have to pinch myself still regularly, but I put it all down to one reason, because that's where God wanted me. I never ever said, well, one day I'm going to be, or, I want to get to It was never like that. It was just, you know, wherever you want to take me is where I'll go. My job wasn't to open the doors, it was just to walk through the doors that were opened. And I can assure you, the support, the comfort, in some of those really tough times, and there were some times that were tougher than others, it was good to have a God that I knew was there for me, that never left me in all those times. Never, ever, ever. Some of those tough times I've shared with some people in this room. They were part of some of those tough times. And, you know, I know that whilst there's always a dark night, there's always a sunrise in the morning, and certainly from my perspective, that gave me a lot of courage to simply be there for you. So thank you for that. As I said, I'm mindful. It's now time for me to probably get somebody to walk around with a microphone. Now, as you do think about, I'm sure you've had a chance to think about some questions. If you can just speak up so everyone can hear, that would be really good. Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. If we can just give Andrew a round of applause, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so because we're a bit crowded in, I'll get you to yell out your questions and then I might perhaps repeat them. We are live streaming onto Facebook at the moment, so we had a question down the front here. Actually, I'll give you the mic because you're close.
Thank you very much for your words, Andrew. I would have crawling over broken glass to be here today. My daughter's just turned 22, and I was at her testation only a couple of weeks ago, class 331. I think your last one was 330?
That's right.
And she's stationed as a probie in not very far from here. She got applied locally. And as a father, I see the jobs that she's been visiting, and she is one of the younger members, as you quite acknowledged. And I guess as a father, I'm scared. I'm scared. I know she's had the best training, and you cannot fault the training that the police go through in their training these days. It took her 3 years to get in, passed the hand grip test, because she's only a slight girl and you set the bar pretty high. But as a father, I'm scared because I see the jobs that she's going to. She's done a couple of full overnight shifts. She's done the full spectrum, and I'm scared because domestic violence is on the increase. The drugs are definitely on the increase, and she comes home and I've been told by professionals that I should debrief, I should listen to what she's got to say, not quiz her, but just listen. But I see that the world has definitely changed gear, and I'm wondering if you would care to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. What was your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy.
Here's a picture of you and her in
There you go.
2012 at Darling Harbour.
There you go. So that would have been down at one of the open days, was it?
Correct. And here's two pictures.
Jeremy's brought his photo album with him. How good's that? That's very good. Now, here's Jeremy at Ayers Rock on holidays. Good on her. Well, how proud are you? Fantastic. Listen, that is a good question, and something that every parent asks. I've got 2 sons in the cops. If we didn't do it well, there is no way I would let them be policed. They don't need to be policed. They're builders by trade. Your daughter, this force, is the best trained, the best equipped, the best prepared force in the nation. In fact, up there with the best in the world. Trust me, because I've seen the rest in the world. I've got to say, not only do they have the right training, you've got to understand, you don't just walk in. When I joined, as a 21-year-old kid, I was a 10-week wonder. What were you? Were you a cadet? Cadet. So cadets did a little bit longer, but you probably joined at about 16 or something, did you? There you go. A bit different than a young girl at 22. 10 weeks, I walked into the Redfern barracks. 10 weeks later, I walked out in a blue uniform, a gun, walked up the street, and someone said, "Thank goodness you're here. I've got a problem." And I thought, who are they talking to? I turned and me. They not only get the best training, they certainly have the very best of equipment. There is no better equipment out there for them. And they are with people that know what team's about. They look after each other. You can rest assured that they're in good company.
Good boyfriend's here today.
There you go.
Probably a future father-in-law.
There you go. Well, look, the other thing you need to understand too is that some of the problems you talk about are real. I mean, domestic violence. You talked about domestic violence. If it is truly it is the most underreported crime that we deal with. And if you were to drill down into the figures, two ways. One is, how many people die as a result of domestic violence? Let me tell you, it's high. In New South Wales, it's enormously high. And if you talked about how many cops get hurt, because it's one of the main jobs they go to, it's a real problem. When you're in a group like this, if we had another half an hour, I'd love to talk about those sorts of things. The reality is, you can say this to men because it's the way it is, and any cop in the room would tell you, they go and have a look at the synopsis on the weekend. Domestic violence is primarily a man disease. I don't know why, but we belt our missus, or we belt the kids, or we can't, we have a blue with a neighbour, or whatever it is, but the reality is, it's something where we as a community need to take responsibility, and we need to do something to change it, because it's only going to get worse for those young cops. Having said that, how fortunate are we that there are young women and men like, what's your daughter's name? Jennifer. Like Jennifer, that will step up and say, I'll pull on a uniform, I'll turn up, I'll go and do the job. You know, there's somebody here, there's a supervisor here from Liverpool who worked night shift last night. Turned up here, had 2 coffees, and he's off, he's going, he's here. How fortunate are we that there are people that will turn up and do that day in, day out, even when it's really tough, even when there's problems and they're getting abused or whatever. Very fortunate. So send our regards, she'll be okay.
Okay, go on down the front here.
Thanks, Jack. Andrew, pleasure to have you here, and it's also a double pleasure because my friend John Carroll has I've been able to facilitate that reunion with you. In speaking with a number of cops, friends of mine, they've mentioned one challenge that they are not able to do much about, one which frustrates them, one which is shared by the public. And that challenge is regarded as being tantamount to being criminal, a criminal thing that they can't do anything about, and that is the inadequacy in some quarters of the judiciary to give penalties which are not commensurate with the crime. What's your feelings on that?
Yeah, well, look, it'd be really, really easy to get in a corner and say, yeah, well, this is... The fact is, that could almost be a distraction for these young cops, and not so young cops. Because the older you get, the more cynical you get in life. I used to say, and still say to my boys, you know what? You can't be focused on the outcome. You're here to do the job. And so, as frustrating as it is, and it was, and it seems that it's always been like that, you've got to focus on actually what you're here for. It's to actually stop the offence, take the offender into custody, make sure you've got the information, the evidence, put it before a court and let them decide. Now, whether it's adequate or inadequate, there are avenues for us to actually appeal if we feel that it's grossly inadequate. Doesn't mean we'll always get the chance to have the matter dealt with. But the reality is, when you start talking about some of the problems we're seeing in society around drugs and the like, we're the wrong people to ask. We have a view that would say you're better off to incarcerate on many occasions. At least then we keep you safe. If they're out there and they're doing robberies of little old ladies with handbags, whilst they're at Long Bay or at Parklea, they're not going to be robbing any little old ladies tonight with handbags. But you can't keep them there forever. The reality is your crime rates are very low. They're the lowest they've been for over 20 years here. Your prison population is through the roof. That's because we target repeat offenders. That's why the success that New South Wales has enjoyed now for a number of years, for the last 10, 11 years, has been because we've been putting more people in prison. It's not the answer, because they've all got to come out. They've all got to come out. So we've got to look at how people can deal with that. If anything, your police should be there just to buy time until somebody that's got responsibility for turning people's lives around can actually do it. Because just throwing them into a cell doesn't change a lot. It might for a while, but not for a long time. Having said that, you are absolutely right. It is a screaming frustration of every cop to sort of think, this person did that, and yet they got, it's almost like they've been slapped over the wrist with a wet lettuce leaf. Now, that's the way a lot of cops would view it. I know if you speak to judicial officers, many of them say we're handing out longer sentences now than we ever have. And Don Weatherburn tells us that that is the case. So it's a bit of an issue. The good thing is that for us is we've got cops that still want to focus on their role as opposed to getting so cynical and upset that they basically say, oh, I'm going to give it away. There are times when we all felt like that, but thank goodness, invariably they don't. They just keep turning up and doing the job. But a great question. Yeah.
4 years there, how do you handle being a Christian and doing the job?
Yeah.
The question was, Andrew being a Christian, how did he handle being a Christian and doing the job at the same time? How do those two intermix?
Yeah. You know what? I never even thought about it. People would sort of say, look, there are still people that say, you've got to be weak to be a Christian, don't you? You want to take a hard path, be a Christian in a police force. So don't, people used to say, oh, that's easy, it's a bit Sunday schoolish. No, it's not. I tell you now, it'd be much easier to go down to the pub with the boys, get blind drunk, have 3 or 4 girlfriends on the side, mad gambling habits, all those things. That's the easy way, because that's what, that's not the high road. Not condemning that, but to say, we think there's a better way. And so I lived that for many, many years. It was never a problem with me because, before I was a cop, I was a Christian. So I just happened to be a Christian who was at the end a commissioner. It wasn't the other way around. I wasn't a commissioner who happened to be a Christian. When I finished, no longer, I've got wonderful memories of the New South Wales Police Force, fantastic friendships, but at the end of the day, that's finished. That profession for me now has closed, that door has closed, and I'm into the next phase of my life. I'm still the Christian man I was when I was 14 and I made that decision. So, they're the enduring things for me. It wasn't a problem. It didn't mean that you needed to go in there and, bash people over the head and say, turn or burn. You don't do that. Take some of that advice from Mother Teresa, and that's a much easier way. Because I can tell you, like I watched those 2 people that lived next door to me, if you identify, cops will watch you. They'll be waiting. What's he like under pressure when he's getting a gob full? Does he give it back in spades, and does he, is he foul-mouthed? Is he, does he lie? They watch for that. Is he genuine? You know what I'm talking about. The cops in this room, you know what I'm talking about. And so it was not an issue for me. In fact, if anything, I can guarantee I couldn't have stood before you today doing what I'm doing if it weren't for the fact that I was a Christian, and it did mean everything to me. I wouldn't be married to the same woman. It's tough enough now, let alone if I didn't have Christ. I can tell you, my kids wouldn't be the kids they are. So, it was the best decision I have ever made, and I'm sure I'll go to my grave with the same view for an ever and ever, I can assure you.
Okay, any other questions? Yep.
Andrew, you were the Commissioner of Police during the time, and you served with Premier Baird.
Mm-hmm.
Premier Baird was known as a man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
You were known as a man of faith. Are you able to share any insights? What it was like, personally and professionally, to work with a Christian Premier?
Okay, so the question was, Andrew had the chance to work alongside Premier Baird, and how did that, can he share any insights into that relationship?
I blame Mike Baird for my extra 3 years I spent in the police force. See, I was meant to be out. Most police commissioners last about 5 years. I was meant to be out 5. And at the end of the 3rd contract, I said to Mike, not again. It's over. It's finished. No. Let somebody else come in. We need new thinking. We need fresh blood. You don't need somebody that's got a 10-year-old mindset to do a job tomorrow. So, but Mike was fantastic. I've got to say, I so enjoyed working with him for the last couple of years of my career. And it was only because he was so genuine. He was, what he said is what he did. And I liked that. Look, I'd worked my time as Commissioner, I'd had 10 police ministers. When Premier Berejiklian came in, she was my 6th Premier. So I'd seen one or two. And it was fantastic. And I can assure you, if you were to take his name and one event, and Lint Cafe was so important for all of us, and to have him there and he simply said, whatever you need as an organisation, whatever you require from me or from government, I can assure you, you've got it. He was genuine in that, and certainly his faith shone through, his commitment to keeping everyone safe. I've got to be honest too, Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister at the time, and Tony was fantastic as well. I wasn't involved in any of the operational stuff, but I was dealing with the up stuff, and that was the Premier and the Prime Minister and the National Security Committee and so forth. And they were nothing but spectacular, but Mike shone through as a man of faith. He lived his faith. For me, it was probably one of the highlights of my career, having the privilege of working alongside him. Sad that he's gone, but every day must finish. You know, the best day you've ever lived in your life, it came to an end, and the next one started when the sun came up the next day. That's the way it is. The best holiday you've ever had has to come to an end. And at this stage, you know, I think we're in pretty good hands, but for me personally, I really, really enjoyed my time with him.
Okay, maybe a couple more. Yep, so...
Thanks for the talk. My name is Daniel, and my question is that the imprisonment of Aboriginal people is very high all over Australia, and I'm just wondering, as a Christian and also as a commissioner, is this something that you've thought of or you've done regarding to this? Thanks.
Let me assure you, Indigenous incarceration rates are high for one reason. They commit offences. Remember I said to you, the frustration that we feel for not being able to control things like sentencing and terms of imprisonment and the like, incarceration, is not something that we're responsible for. That's the only person that can send a person to prison is a judge or a magistrate. So our job was to simply put those that have committed crimes before a court and let the court make a decision. Is it frustrating? You know, anyone going to prison is frustrating because that means there's a very, very high chance they'll come out and continue to commit crimes. It's what we know as recidivism. So does it cause me concern? Yeah. Did it cause me concern as a commissioner? Absolutely. What did we do about it? Well, I thought that we'd be better off to actually try and bring more Aboriginal people in to be police officers. So we started a program called iProud. And in terms of graduations now, we had, I think my attestation before I finished, the last one, there was something like 16% of everyone that graduated was a graduate of Indigenous background. So I didn't want them to come in as what we called an ACLO, which was a community liaison officer. There is no reason why they wouldn't come in as full sworn officers. I can recall going out to Dubbo when we first started this program. The first program started in 2008, I think it was. And I met some of the people there, some of these people that were on this program called iProud. There was a couple of them there, two that stood out in my mind. One was a young guy who came from Tamworth, but he came to Dubbo to do the program. I tell you, he was as smart as they get. He was as sharp as a Wilkinson sword blade. He could have been the Prime Minister of this nation. He's currently serving as a cop down in Surrey Hills. That's a good thing. Another girl that was there, one of her relatives was subject of he died in New South Wales police custody in a cell, part of the death in custody process. And she put that all behind her and went on to become a police officer. She came from a little place called Angledool, which was like 1,000,000 miles west of the Black Stump. There was about 16 people lived in the town, and they were all of the same family. But she said, I want to be a police officer. And so she moved to Dubbo, did it really, really hard. She got through. She's now working out in that area. She's a senior constable, doing a fantastic job. So the whole issue of incarceration of Aboriginal people the reality is, and the thing that people need to hold clear in their mind is, it's not the police. We don't put anyone in jail. Incarceration, sentencing to jail is something for a court. And let me assure you, we've just talked about how many judges are reluctant to put anyone in prison. To get there, you've done something. They've committed crimes and they've been convicted, and judges have put them there, or magistrates have put them there. How we stop the problem, why it is that they're overrepresented, is again, it's something that needs to be really, really well considered, and we need to look at what we can do to stop that, to lower that rate. Because there's there is no reason, as I said, why Aboriginals in communities, certainly in New South Wales, shouldn't go on and one day be the Commissioner of Police or the Prime Minister of a nation. That they are so talented. But it is frustrating when we look at it and sort of say, well, why is it this case right over Australia? Not sure. So there was one other, we can fit that one more, yes.
Why does the media give the force such a bagging?
Why does the media... Hey, look, the reality is, there's an old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's the way the media look at it. What's the breaking news they go to every night? It's not, Fred's just won $1 million in the lotto, or we've just had some fantastic good news event. It's always bad. Have you noticed that? Next time the breaking news comes on, whoever you're with, have a bet. Say, I bet everything I own that this won't be good news. And you won't be able to get it on. Ring whatever it is, dial a bet, and they'll say, no, we don't take those bets. We know we're going to lose. The reality is, you're doing things as a police force that is often upsetting for a whole lot of people. Remember I talked about courageous leadership? And the reality again is that when you start taking people's liberty away from them, they get angry. They don't think that they've done anything wrong. Do you know anyone like this? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm innocent. If I had $1 for every time I heard somebody say I'm innocent that ended up going to jail, I wouldn't have never had to work. I would have been a rich man, because everyone tells you they're innocent. So when you start looking at what we're dealing with, what they're doing on a day-by-day basis, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of aggro. They are kicking doors down on drug dens, they are taking armed robbers into custody and murderers and child abusers. So that for media is salacious, they love it. If it bleeds, it leads. And that's okay, you know why? The only reason they put it on the telly or put it in the newspaper is because people like us buy the paper or we watch the news. My old mum, she's gone now, mum's been dead a couple of years. She used to say to me, thank goodness that some of these stations are on the radio and on the television, because I'd never know the truth otherwise, because you guys keep the truth from us. It's not safe to walk out of my front door. So, well, I guarantee you it is. And that's because we're big consumers of the news. From an organisation's perspective, that's one of the reasons you've got a commissioner. At the end of the day, the buck's got to stop somewhere, and it's got to stop with you. That's why I'd end up saying, well, hang on a minute, whether we're dealing with a major event or a problem in a street in Sydney or an event on a Saturday night that goes haywire, at the end of the day, I was responsible for those 21,000 people, and therefore I was the one where the buck had to stop. And that's okay. Don't get too excited about it. It's been like that since Adam wore shorts with the media. The fact is, it's always going to be that way, and that's just one of it goes with the job, and it goes with the responsibility. So, gents, I know we've run out of time. Like you, I've got to get out there because I reckon the coppers will give me a parking ticket if I'm out there any later than 9. So I've got about 8 minutes. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for listening to me. For the time that I was your commissioner, I've got to say thank you for your support. The number of blokes that have come up this morning and even just said, thank you. And really, if anything, I should be stopping and saying thank you, each and every one of you, because it's been a privilege. I've been so fortunate, blessed, call it what you want. And again, it's been good to catch up with you this morning. So,